buddy of mine, Andy McCarthy, sent me a story earlier today from andrewbostom.org. If you're faint of heart, you may not want to listen to this. But if you want to know what's going on, you may want to listen to this. We already know how human beings are treated by other human beings in Afghanistan, by the Taliban, in the Middle East, and so forth. But I want to tell you about the life of Wiley. The life of Wiley. Australian federal police officer Narelle Jens. Keep that in mind. That's the gentleman's name. And the dog Wiley. The Australian has a moving report, writes Boston, on the humane efforts of Australian federal police officer Narelle Jens to rescue Afghan dogs, viewed as unclean in Islam and therefore wantonly brutalized by local Muslims. In her 10-month tour, the 37-year-old has treated countless dogs and successfully adopted 15 Afghan strays out to returned coalition soldiers across the world, many of whom have testified to the rehumanizing impact of their animal companions. The following extracts from the life of Wiley, an Afghan mutt rescued by Jens, are prototypical of the cruelty our Afghan Muslim allies mete out to innocent dogs, especially those of Kandahar, as the Australian report relates. Wiley, the Afghan mutt, was rescued in February by a convoy of British soldiers on patrol in Kandahar Bazaar, where a dog-fighting crowd was beating the smaller dog with lumps of wood to force the last fight out of him. That beating turned out to be the least horrific brutality this resilient canine would suffer over the following weeks and months. Remarkably, he did, but his torments were far from over. 2 weeks later, Jens received another call. Local dog fighters had cut off Wiley's ears and had scalped him in the process, before using the same homemade knife to cut his muzzle wide open from his nose to under his eye. Folks, I'm going to tell you what's going on. He was patched up again by Jens and a team of Australian Defence Force doctors, only to return from his perilous forays outside the base with new injuries, a stab wound to the chest and a savagely docked tail. Then, horrifically, one day he limped back to the camp after Kandahar locals, many of whom despise dogs only marginally less than they do coalition soldiers, had tried to sever his private part. 3 times Jens and ADF doctors had to restitch the wound. Quote, once we stitched for 90 minutes without anesthesia, she said. I can't fathom how much pain he must have been in, but he just lay there motionless, looking up at us. He didn't bite or growl once, unquote. Wiley, the dog. Wiley's refusal to submit became legendary around the Kandahar base. But when he was grabbed yet again by local thugs and thrown under a passing car, it seemed his luck had finally run out. Quote, it was the first time I felt defeated because Wiley had become a symbol of Kandahar, Jen said. So many soldiers identified with him, but I just couldn't work out how to keep this dog alive. That was the day I decided I had to take him with me, unquote. With the help of a British and U.S. Soldiers Animal Companion Fund, Wiley was evacuated to London via Kabul 6 weeks ago to begin the long road of quarantine hurdles that Jens hopes will eventually bring him to Australia and her wildlife rescue property just outside Canberra. The compassionate Jens' eyewitness narrative is, or certainly should be, a cautionary tale. It recalls British historian Mary Boyce's earlier history in the 1960s. Boyce, a preeminent scholar, spent a 12-month sabbatical in 63 and 64 living in the Zoroastrian community of Iran. During a lecture series given at Oxford in 1975, she noted how the Iranian ancestors of the Zoroastrians had a devoted working relationship, that is, herding livestock with dogs, when they lived a nomadic existence on the Asian steppes. This sustained contact evolved over generations such that dogs became a part in the Zoroastrian religious beliefs and practices, which in due course became a part of their heritage. Boyce then provided an historical overview of the deliberate wanton cruelty of Iranian Muslims toward dogs in Iran, including a personal eyewitness account. In Sharifabad, the dogs distinguished clearly between Muslim and Zoroastrian, and were prepared to go, full of hope, into a crowded Zoroastrian assembly, or to fall asleep trustfully in a Zoroastrian lane, but would flee as before Satan from a group of Muslim boys. The evidence points, this is what she wrote, to Muslim hostility to these animals having been deliberately fostered in the first place in Iran as a point of opposition to the old pre-Islamic jihad conquest faith. I'm not going to continue to read this. This is gut-wrenching, what's done to puppies and all the rest of it. And in writing this Professor Mary Boyce talked about the screams of pain from puppies, the torture and torment of these animals. They just pull them right off the streets. Mark, why are you reading this on the air? Well, folks, the fact of the matter is there's a lot of stuff going on in the world. There's a lot of things that people know and see and hear which they choose not to relate to you. I feel I have a need and a responsibility to share it with you. When I read this, it disgusted me. I shared it with some of my friends who run shelters and so forth, with my family. And you're my family, and I want you to know about this. It's disgusting. If you're prepared to treat a puppy or a dog this way, is there any wonder that democracy doesn't take hold in some parts of the world? I'm very serious about this. These animals aren't a threat to anybody. They don't even have a history of religious battles, ancestral fights, none of it. They're as pure joy and happiness as you can get. If you're so full of hate and contempt, and you don't have a heart and a soul, and you're going to treat puppies and dogs this way, you're going to treat other human beings this way. This is why I don't buy into this whole quote-unquote democracy project. I buy into pursuing America's national security interests, which sometimes involves military action or all-out war and sometimes does not. But it's not our responsibility to send our children overseas to force people who would do these kinds of things to be civilized or to vote for their governments. If we do so because it's in our national security interests, that's one thing. But to do so just because we're following a doctrine or a belief is absurd, absolutely crazy, and I don't believe in it. Now, if there's horrific genocide taking place, then a people like us can be moved, and in many instances, I feel, if not most, should be moved to try and help in many different ways to effectively end it. Certainly if we can. Not because it's in our national security interest, but because it's in our own human conscious interest. But if there are societies, and I use that word loosely, that have spent 1,000 years killing each other, the people have, and it's not a matter of genocide, it's a matter of practice almost, routine, then that's not our hell. That's somebody else's hell. And we don't have enough people and enough resources to fix it. I'm being honest with you. This is my view. And so I want to state one more time something that I know is controversial, but I believe it in my heart of hearts. It is time to bomb the hell out of those areas of Afghanistan where we think the enemy is, and bomb them relentlessly, and bomb them, and bomb them, and bomb them again, and then get out. That's my view.